Elvis was mid-song when a voice cut through the music. A soldier shouting just 3 words. He stopped playing. The band went silent. What happened next froze the entire crowd and became one of the most unforgettable moments of his career. In this video, you'll see exactly what the soldier said, and why Elvis's reaction is still talked about decades later. This young soldier had recently returned from Vietnam, and the transition back to civilian life wasn't going the way everyone told him it would. While his mother had bought him this concert ticket as a welcome home gift, he wasn't here for the same reasons as everyone else in that arena. While everyone around him was lost in the music, he was fighting a different kind of war. This one was against the memories that haunted him every single night. The teenage girls beside him were screaming and reaching toward the stage, but he sat perfectly still. His hands gripped the armrests of his seat so tightly his knuckles had turned white. When Elvis began singing, those hands started to shake. It wasn't from excitement like the fans around him. It was from something much deeper and more painful. He had lost his best friend in a firefight outside Saigon 6 months earlier. The guilt was destroying him from the inside out. Every morning he woke up, and every morning he remembered that his friend was gone. The worst part was knowing it was his fault. He had convinced his best friend to extend his tour for 6 more months. They were supposed to go home together after their first year, but he had talked him into staying. He told him they could make a real difference if they stayed longer. 2 weeks before they were supposed to finally rotate home, his friend was killed protecting their unit from enemy fire. He was right there when it happened. He watched his childhood friend die in a rice paddy thousands of miles from home. The medics said he died instantly, but the soldier knew better. He had held his friend's hand as the life went out of his eyes. During those final weeks in Vietnam, after his friend's death, he couldn't sleep. The other soldiers tried to help, but nothing worked until someone brought a small radio into their bunker. At night, when the fighting stopped and everything was quiet, they would tune in to Armed Forces Radio. Sometimes they got lucky and caught Elvis songs. Those were the only moments when he felt any peace at all. Elvis's voice somehow made the guilt bearable for a few minutes at a time. Tonight wasn't just about seeing a concert. He had come here hoping that somehow Elvis's voice could help him find the peace that had been missing from his life for months. He needed to do something for his friend, something that might finally let him sleep through the night without seeing his face. In his right pants pocket, he carried his friend's dog tags. He had been carrying them every day since the funeral, but tonight felt different. As the first song ended and Elvis moved closer to the front of the stage, he knew he was running out of time. The concert would be over in 2 hours, and he would go back to his empty apartment and his sleepless nights. He reached into his pocket and felt the cold metal of the tags. His heart was pounding as he realized what he had to do. He came for more than a show. He came hoping Elvis's voice could do what nothing else had: help him say goodbye. According to multiple accounts, Elvis was performing a slow, intimate ballad when the arena's peaceful atmosphere was suddenly shattered. The king was in his element, moving gracefully across the stage in his white jumpsuit, his voice floating over the crowd with the precision that had made him famous around the world. The audience was swaying along, couples holding each other close while parents pointed toward the stage, showing their children the legend they had grown up listening to on the radio. Then a voice cut through the music like a knife. It wasn't the usual fan scream or typical shouts of admiration that Elvis heard at every concert. This voice was different. It was raw, desperate, and filled with pain that everyone in the building could feel instantly. From somewhere in the crowd, the young soldier stood up, his face streaked with tears, and shouted 3 words that were so unexpected, so filled with anguish, that they stopped Elvis mid-verse. The words weren't "I love you" or "Elvis, over here," like the usual fan shouts that performers learn to ignore. They weren't requests for autographs or attempts to get attention. They came from a place of deep suffering that most people in that arena had never experienced themselves. According to witnesses, the soldier's voice cracked with emotion as he yelled those 3 words with everything he had left in him. "Sing for Tommy." The words reportedly cut through the arena with such intensity that they seemed to travel through the entire space, reaching every person in the crowd. Tears were streaming down the soldier's face as he stood there in front of thousands of strangers, exposing his grief to everyone in that building. His hands were shaking as he held his friend's dog tags, and his whole body was trembling with the effort of getting those words out. Elvis stopped singing immediately. His hand was still holding the microphone, but no sound came out as he searched the crowd to find where that desperate voice had come from. The backup singers went quiet, their harmonies fading into nothing. The band stopped playing, instruments going silent one by one as the musicians realized something extraordinary was happening. All those thousands of people held their breath as Elvis walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes scanning the audience. The silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in that arena had ever experienced. It wasn't the quiet between songs or the pause before applause. This was the kind of silence that happens when something sacred is taking place, when everyone present knows they are witnessing something that will stay with them forever. You could hear the soldier sobbing, his cries echoing through the massive space as thousands of people sat completely still. In that moment, Elvis realized this wasn't just another fan wanting attention. This wasn't someone trying to disrupt the show or get their 15 minutes of fame. This was a man in real pain, asking for something much more important than an autograph or a photograph. This was someone who needed help, and Elvis could hear it in every broken syllable of those 3 words. He looked directly at the soldier and nodded, acknowledging the young man's pain in front of everyone. For a moment that felt like an eternity. Elvis stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at this broken soldier while thousands of people waited to see what would happen next. What Elvis did next went against everything his manager and security team had trained him to do, but it showed the world who he really was behind the fame. The arena was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. Everyone knew they were watching something important unfold, but nobody knew what Elvis would do. Security began to move in, but Elvis signaled them to hold back before they could reach the soldier. 2 large men in black suits froze in their tracks when they saw Elvis's gesture. They had worked with him long enough to know that when he raised his hand like that, he meant business. But this wasn't part of any plan they had discussed backstage. This wasn't in the script that his manager had approved. Elvis had a choice to make, and everyone in that building could feel the weight of that decision hanging in the air. He could continue with the planned set list and ignore the interruption. He could make a joke to lighten the mood and get the crowd back on his side. He could signal for security to handle the situation while he started the next song. Any of those options would have been completely normal and expected. Instead, Elvis did something that stunned everyone in that building and changed the course of that entire evening. He walked down the steps at the side of the stage, something he never did during a performance. Elvis always stayed on the main stage area during concerts. That was another rule his team had established for safety and crowd control reasons. But there he was, leaving the safety of the elevated platform and walking directly into the audience. His white jumpsuit caught the stage lights as he moved through the crowd. The crowd parted as Elvis made his way through the first few rows, people stepping aside in shock and amazement. Some fans reached out to touch him as he passed, but he was focused entirely on reaching the soldier. Children pointed at him with wide eyes. Adults stood with their mouths open, unable to believe what they were seeing. The king of rock and roll was walking through the audience during a live performance, something that simply didn't happen at major concerts. When he reached the young man, Elvis didn't ask questions or demand an explanation for the interruption. He didn't lecture him about proper concert etiquette or express frustration about the disruption to his show. Instead, he simply put his hand on the soldier's shoulder. The gesture was gentle but firm, the kind of touch that says you're not alone anymore without needing any words to explain it. The entire arena watched as these two men stood face to face. Elvis looked directly into the soldier's tear-filled eyes and, according to witnesses, asked him to tell him about his friend. Accounts say Elvis spoke quietly, but his voice carried perfectly through the arena's sound system, which was still turned on from the performance. Those words changed everything that happened next, opening a door that had been locked tight inside the soldier's heart for months. The young man collapsed into Elvis's arms right there in front of thousands of strangers, finally able to release the grief he'd been carrying alone since his friend's death. What followed turned that rock concert into something none of those people had ever experienced before. The soldier's story poured out through broken sobs, while thousands of people watched in complete silence. Elvis stood in the audience holding this grieving young man, while fans throughout the arena put away their cameras. This wasn't a moment for pictures. This was something deeper than entertainment. Parents held their children closer, not from anything inappropriate, but because they understood they were witnessing someone's private pain being shared in public. According to witnesses, the soldier began telling Elvis about his friend through his tears. His voice was broken and shaky, but every word carried across that silent arena. He explained how they had grown up together, enlisted together, and served together. His friend had been the kind of soldier who shared his food with anyone who was hungry and volunteered for dangerous missions to protect newer guys in the unit. The night before he died, his friend had been talking about coming home and all the things he wanted to do. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer, cry, or look away from this intensely private moment happening in such a public space. Some people were openly weeping. Others stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break the spell. Veterans in the audience understood immediately what the soldier was going through. Wives and mothers held their hands to their hearts, thinking about their own loved ones who had served. The teenagers who had come just to scream for Elvis found themselves learning about loss in a way they had never experienced before. Elvis listened to every word, nodding and occasionally whispering something back that only the soldier could hear. He never looked away from the young man's face. He never checked his watch or glanced back at the stage. His entire focus was on this one soldier and the story he was telling. Elvis had served in the army himself, though not in combat, and he understood the bond between soldiers in a way that many entertainers wouldn't have. Then Elvis did something that made grown men in the audience start crying. According to some eyewitnesses, he asked the soldier if he could honor his friend's memory. His voice was gentle but clear enough for everyone to hear. The soldier reached into his pocket with shaking hands and pulled out the silver chain he had been carrying for months. The tags caught the stage lights as he lifted them over his head. For a moment, he held them close to his chest, as if he was saying goodbye one more time. Accounts say the soldier placed the chain in Elvis's hands, right there in front of everyone. The metal tags rested against Elvis's white jumpsuit, a stark reminder of sacrifice against all that glitter and glamour. Elvis accepted the soldier's keepsake with the reverence of someone receiving something sacred. When he looked up at the crowd, his eyes were filled with tears. The entire arena erupted not in screams, but in the kind of respectful applause usually reserved for moments of national mourning. Elvis helped the soldier back to his seat, then slowly made his way back to the stage. When he picked up the microphone again, his voice was different, softer, more human than anyone had ever heard it before. For the first time since his friend's death, the soldier felt like he wasn't carrying his grief alone anymore. But what happened in that Memphis arena was just the beginning of something much larger than anyone could have imagined. According to accounts circulated among veterans and fans, that single act of compassion created ripple effects that spread far beyond that Memphis arena. Word of what happened that night traveled quickly through the veteran community. long before social media existed to share stories instantly. Veterans talked to other veterans. Wives called their friends. Families shared the story at dinner tables across America. Within weeks, people who hadn't even been at the concert knew about the soldier who interrupted Elvis and the king who stopped everything to listen. Some witnesses later said the encounter helped the soldier begin to heal from wounds that had been festering for months. For the first time since coming home from Vietnam, he could reportedly sleep through the night without waking up in cold sweats. The story spread through veteran networks as an example of someone finally listening to what soldiers were going through when they returned home from an unpopular war. Local Veterans Administration hospitals heard about the story and began talking about it with other returning soldiers who were struggling with similar problems. Veterans who had been carrying their own grief and trauma discovered that this one moment gave them permission to talk about their experiences. The soldier's courage in speaking up publicly about his friend's death showed other veterans that it was okay to grieve openly, even in front of strangers. According to some accounts, Elvis continued to show special attention to veterans at his concerts after that night. Concert security started recognizing the look of soldiers who needed help, and they would quietly let Elvis know before shows. Elvis never turned any of them away. He would meet with veterans backstage, listen to their stories, and acknowledge their service during performances. Word spread through VA hospitals and veteran organizations that Elvis concerts were safe spaces for soldiers to process their experiences. The story became something larger than just one concert moment. It represented what could happen when someone with a platform chose to use it for something meaningful. Parents who had lost children in the war found comfort in knowing that their sons' sacrifices were being acknowledged in public spaces. Gold Star mothers would write letters to entertainers, hoping for similar recognition of their fallen children. Other veterans began showing up at various concerts and public events, hoping for their own moment of recognition and healing. The Memphis incident had shown that sometimes public figures would stop what they were doing to listen to people in pain. It gave veterans permission to speak up about their losses instead of suffering in silence. The immediate impact was clear to everyone who was there that night. Thousands of people had witnessed something that changed how they thought about fame, service, and human compassion. They went home and told their families about what they had seen. They called their friends and described how a rock concert had turned into something sacred. They wrote letters to newspapers about the night Elvis proved that celebrities could use their influence for more than just entertainment. That one moment had shown an entire arena full of people what it looked like when someone chose to see the human being behind an interruption, instead of just seeing a disruption to their plans. The Memphis concert became a turning point that showed how one moment of genuine attention could transform both the person giving it and the person receiving it. That night proved that sometimes the most powerful moments happen when someone chooses compassion over convenience, showing us that true greatness isn't measured in record sales or sold-out shows. Elvis could have ignored that soldier's cry, finished his song, and moved on with the show. But instead he chose to see the human being behind the interruption. This story is based on eyewitness reports and fan accounts from that evening. The next time someone interrupts your day with their pain, remember this soldier's courage and ask yourself, will you choose to listen, or will you just keep singing your song? Share your own Elvis memories in the comments below, and subscribe for more stories about the human side of the king.